Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again, and I am so incredibly glad you've joined me today. Please take a quick moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let me know in the comments which city, state, or country you are listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. The harsh, sterile scent of hospital-grade antiseptic still clung aggressively to the back of Cordelia's throat. It had been exactly 5 days since the brutal, agonizing labor that ended in an emergency C-section. Cordelia Sterling sat on the edge of the stiff hospital bed, cradling the tiny, fragile life sleeping soundly in her arms. Her newborn son, Leo, was wrapped tightly in a soft, white cotton receiving blanket. His tiny body was astonishingly light, yet he radiated a profound, miraculous warmth against her chest. She held him so carefully, barely daring to breathe, as if he were the most fragile, priceless treasure in the entire universe. "Congratulations on your discharge, Mrs. Thorne," the attending maternity nurse said with a bright, professional smile, picking up Cordelia's small, canvas duffel bag from the floor. "Little Leo is perfectly healthy, and you are all cleared to head home and rest." The bag contained only a few simple changes of clothes for Leo, her toothbrush, and a thick stack of discharge papers. Its pathetic lightness seemed to perfectly symbolize Cordelia's own profound isolation from the world. Standing just outside the hospital room door, leaning casually against the hallway wall, was her husband, Caleb Thorne. They had been married for 2 years. With his arms crossed over his chest, he leaned his weight against the sterile white wall, his eyes glued obsessively to his glowing smartphone screen as his thumb scrolled endlessly. Even as his pale, physically exhausted wife emerged from the room holding their newborn child, his gaze remained rigidly fixed on his device. He didn't even look up. The nurse called out to him in a cheerful, encouraging voice, "Mr. Thorne, your wife is all ready to go. Congratulations on your beautiful baby boy." At the sound of his name, Caleb finally dragged his eyes away from his phone. His expression was not one of overwhelming joy. It was not the awestruck, emotional face of a new father. It was the blank, irritated, weary mask of a busy man who had just been forced to complete an incredibly inconvenient chore. He shoved his smartphone into the pocket of his tailored slacks and walked slowly toward them. He made absolutely no move to take little Leo from her tired arms. He did not offer a supporting hand to his wife, who was visibly wincing, still deeply sore and bleeding from major abdominal surgery. He simply snatched the light duffel bag from the nurse's hand without a word of thanks. Cars parked downstairs. "Let's go," Caleb muttered in a low, flat voice. Then he turned his back on her and started walking briskly down the long corridor, expecting her to keep up. Cordelia swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no choice but to bite her lip, suppress the burning pain in her abdomen, and slowly follow his retreating back. When the automatic glass doors of the hospital lobby slid open, a brisk, freezing autumn wind cut violently through her thin knit cardigan, making her shiver uncontrollably. Unconsciously, she clutched little Leo tighter against her chest, attempting to shield his tiny face from the biting wind. "I can't let him get cold," was the only coherent thought echoing in her exhausted, trauma-fogged brain. In the hospital's circular valet driveway sat a familiar, breathtakingly beautiful jet-black car, a custom-built Mercedes Maybach. It was a staggering piece of automotive machinery, but more importantly, it was a gift. It had been a personal gift from her father, the legendary billionaire Harrison Sterling, presented to her on her 20th birthday. Since her marriage to Caleb, however, Caleb had been the one driving it almost exclusively. For him, a young, arrogant tech startup CEO, trying desperately to look the part of a titan, the $500,000 car was a vital symbol of his fabricated success. It was the ultimate status object. Cordelia stood on the freezing pavement and allowed herself to believe, just for a fleeting second, that Caleb would walk over, open the heavy, heated rear door of the Maybach, gently help her and their newborn son inside, and perhaps offer a single kind word. You did great in there, baby, he might say, acknowledging the absolute hell the past 5 days had taken on her fragile body. It was a small, pathetic, incredibly fragile fantasy. Caleb didn't stop at the Maybach. He pressed the electronic key fob in his pocket, unlocking the luxury vehicle, but he walked right past it, striding purposefully out of the hospital drop-off zone and pointing toward a dirty, crowded public bus stop on the main, busy street. Cordelia froze. It felt as if her feet had literally taken root in the freezing asphalt. She couldn't move a single muscle. Her mind went entirely blank, completely unable to process the horrifying reality of what was happening. "Caleb!" The word came out of her mouth as a choked, desperate whisper. He stopped a few feet ahead and turned around. An impatient, ugly scowl instantly deepened the lines on his forehead. "What are you doing? I told you it's this way. Hurry up." A sharp, searing pain flared directly from her fresh C-section incision, radiating through her pelvis. Gritting her teeth, fighting back tears of physical agony, Cordelia slowly limped toward him. A cold, suffocating dread was beginning to spread through her veins like a toxic fog. Aren't we taking the car home?" she gasped, out of breath. Caleb gestured aggressively with his chin toward the grimy, graffiti-covered bus route map bolted to the shelter, looking at her as if she had just asked the most profoundly stupid question in human history. "You're taking that," he stated flatly. He reached a hand deep into the pocket of his designer slacks, rummaged around for a moment, and pulled out a handful of dirty loose change and a single, crumpled, $20 bill. Without an ounce of hesitation, he aggressively shoved the wad of cash into her free hand. The freezing metallic feel of the quarters and dimes was sharp and insulting against her soft palm. A crumpled $20 and maybe $3 in change. Just barely enough to cover the bus fare to get her all the way back to their modest, cramped apartment in Queens. "This will get you to the apartment," he stated, his voice utterly devoid of human emotion. His words sounded like a foreign language to her. "My parents and my sister Brenda are coming over into the city today to celebrate the birth. I'm taking them to that ultra-exclusive new steakhouse in the meatpacking district. I already made VIP reservations weeks ago, so I absolutely cannot be late." Cordelia couldn't believe her own ears. The world seemed to literally spin on its axis. She stared down at the crumpled, dirty cash resting in her palm, and then looked back up at the face of the man standing before her. This was her husband. In her arms was their fragile, 5-day-old son. "Caleb!" Her voice shook violently. "I was just discharged from a major surgery. I had my stomach cut open. It has only been 5 days since my C-section. Leo is only 5 days old, and you are telling me to take him on a crowded, freezing city bus by myself." Caleb waved his hand dismissively, brutally cutting her off. A look of open, naked contempt spread across his handsome face. "Oh my God, Cordelia, please don't be so incredibly dramatic," he groaned, rolling his eyes to the sky. "My sister Brenda was up and walking around the mall 3 days after she had her kid. You're fine. What's the big deal about a bus? It's not even rush hour. There will be plenty of empty seats. Now hurry up, they're almost here." As if on a perfectly orchestrated, cruel cue, the brilliant LED headlights of the Maybach behind them flashed twice. The deep, powerful rumble of its massive engine filled the freezing air. Cordelia slowly turned her head, walking out of a different, secondary hospital exit, laughing loudly and chatting amicably, were Caleb's parents and his sister, Brenda. They didn't even glance in Cordelia's direction. They walked straight up to the gleaming Maybach, pulled open the heavy doors, and climbed into the plush, heated leather seats with practiced, entitled ease. "Look, your bus is pulling up. Go on," Caleb urged, placing a hand on her shoulder and physically pushing her slightly toward the dirty curb. "Just go relax at home. There are some old leftovers in the fridge from Tuesday. Heat something up for dinner. I'll see you whenever I get back." With those final, devastating words, he turned his back on her, walked over to the $500,000 luxury car that was legally supposed to be hers, climbed into the driver's seat, and drove away. He left his bleeding wife and his 5-day-old newborn son standing on the side of a busy street in the freezing wind, without a single shred of concern. The red glow of the Maybach's taillights was quickly swallowed by the chaotic flow of New York City traffic, and soon disappeared completely from view. Cordelia stood entirely alone in the autumn wind, holding her sleeping baby. In her right hand, the crumpled $20 bill was damp with her own nervous sweat. The massive city bus arrived with a loud, aggressive, rattling groan. The pneumatic doors hissed open. The interior was mostly empty, but the air blowing out of it was stale, heavy with the smell of cheap disinfectant, dust, and diesel exhaust fumes. Wincing in blinding agony with every single step as her abdominal incision throbbed and burned, Cordelia slowly, agonizingly climbed the steep rubber steps. She slid the crumpled $20 bill into the automated fare box. The gruff bus driver glanced sympathetically at the pale, shaking woman holding a tiny newborn, but he said nothing. She finally sank into a hard, plastic seat by a scratched window. As the massive bus lurched violently forward, joining the traffic, a sharp, stabbing pain shot violently through her lower abdomen, and she gasped aloud, biting down on her lip so hard it bled. The vibrant, wealthy city flowed past her dirty window. Gleaming corporate skyscrapers, high-end boutiques, and glamorous avenues mocked her misery. The last 2 years she had spent with Caleb Thorne flashed through her mind like a tragic, black-and-white slideshow. Cordelia was the sole heiress to the Sterling family, one of the wealthiest, most ruthlessly powerful financial dynasties in North America. But she had been so desperate to find a pure, unadulterated love, a love entirely untainted by her family's terrifying wealth and influence, that she had hidden her true identity. She had introduced herself to Caleb as a simple, middle-class girl from an apple farming family in upstate New York. In the very beginning, Caleb had been shockingly gentle. He was sweet, attentive, and incredibly loving. He seemed like an ambitious, hardworking young man who just wanted to build a beautiful life. But his attitude began to change. Slowly, insidiously. The shift accelerated rapidly after she became pregnant, and it magnified into outright arrogance after he miraculously landed his first massive, multi-million-dollar tech project. A project that Cordelia had secretly, anonymously orchestrated through her father's massive network of corporate influence to help him succeed. Once Caleb tasted the intoxicating nectar of high-level corporate success, the mask slipped. His mother and his sister Brenda started to openly, routinely sneer at Cordelia, calling her an undeserving, lazy gold digger who was merely dragging their brilliant, successful CO son down. The Thorne family was not the warm, loving, humble home she had so desperately dreamed of finding. It was a toxic, venomous swamp she had blindly waded into. She was a foolish, naive young woman who had willingly chosen to close her eyes and her heart to the screaming red flags. The bus lurched and squeaked to a halt at a long red light. Cordelia looked out the window. In the exact next lane, idling smoothly, was the familiar, flawless black silhouette of her Maybach. It had pulled up right alongside the dirty city bus. Through the heavily tinted glass, the interior lights of the luxury car were on. She could vaguely make out the figures inside. It looked incredibly warm. It looked luxurious, and it sounded like they were laughing. Caleb was turned sideways, looking toward his sister Brenda in the passenger seat, saying something animated. His handsome profile was lit up by a massive, genuine, deeply relaxed smile. It was a smile Cordelia hadn't seen directed at her in a very, very long time. In that exact, suspended fraction of a second, as she watched the man she loved laugh with the people who despised her, while she bled onto the plastic seat of a public bus, Cordelia's heart stopped. It didn't break. It didn't shatter into a million weeping pieces. It simply stopped and then turned infinitely, terrifyingly colder than the biting autumn wind outside. It wasn't profound sadness she felt. It was a complete, total, irreversible psychological awakening, followed immediately by a simmering, volcanic rage as cold and hard as a diamond. The traffic light turned green. The Maybach shot forward like a sleek black rocket, accelerating smoothly toward a night of luxury steaks and expensive champagne, disappearing entirely from her sight. Cordelia looked down at little Leo's peaceful, sleeping face. His tiny pink mouth moved from time to time, as if he were nursing in a sweet dream. He was completely innocent. He was perfect, and he deserved the absolute world. Slowly, carefully, Cordelia reached into her pocket with her free hand. She took out her smartphone and unlocked the screen. She scrolled down through her long list of contacts. Her finger hovered for a brief second over a specific, heavily protected number, a number she had sworn she would never, ever call to ask for a favor. Then, without a single shred of hesitation, she pressed the green call button. The phone rang exactly once before it was immediately answered. A deep, powerful, slightly worried voice, her father's voice, came through the receiver. "Cordelia." She took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the bus. Then, in a voice that was eerily quiet, but forged with an unbreakable, lethal, steely quality, she spoke to the most powerful man on the eastern seaboard. "Dad, can you help me?" she whispered, her eyes turning to ice. I want to leave him." The voice of Harrison, sterling on the other end of the line, instantly turned ice cold. The initial, warm parental worry was violently replaced by a controlled, terrifying billionaire's fury. He asked only 2 questions, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "What did he do to you? And where are you and my grandson?" Cordelia quickly, dispassionately summarized the horrific story, her voice only breaking once. "I'm on a public bus. He made me take a bus home with Leo. He took my car to go to dinner with his family." A deadly, suffocating silence hung heavily on the line. It was the kind of silence that precedes a massive, devastating explosion. When Harrison finally spoke again, his voice was dangerously low, vibrating with an absolute, godlike power. "Listen to me very carefully, Cordelia. It is over now. You will not suffer for a single second longer. I am sending a team to pick you up immediately. Do not go back into that apartment. I will handle the rest. I promise you that." He didn't say exactly what he would do, but that quiet promise was far more terrifying than any screaming threat. It held the immense, crushing weight of a colossal, multi-billion-dollar corporate machine about to be violently set into motion. The sterile click of the call ending echoed in her ear. The bus continued its agonizing, rattling journey deep into the boroughs. The quiet conversations of the other weary passengers, the mundane, dirty city scenery flowing past the scratched window. It all felt like it was happening in another dimension entirely. The burning fire of her rage had transformed into a strange, profound, almost spiritual calm. It was a total certainty that her few words had already sealed a man's ultimate fate. It was a cold, beautiful premonition that an arrogant man's entire world was, from this exact moment forward, about to be turned completely upside down and burned to ashes. It was the eerie, dead quiet just before a Category 5 hurricane makes landfall, and the feeling absolutely consumed her. 40 minutes later, the bus finally hissed to a halt at her stop. Cradling the sleeping Leo against her chest, Cordelia carefully, painfully descended the steep rubber steps, each movement sending a fresh, dull ache through her abdominal incision. She stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of the pre-war, rundown rental apartment building in Queens that she and Caleb had once romantically called their humble love nest. She didn't even have the energy left in her body to reach into her bag and find her keys. She just stood there, swaying slightly in the freezing wind, staring at the peeling paint on the front door. As she stood frozen before the entrance, a massive, imposing black SUV glided utterly, silently up to the curb behind her and stopped. It was a custom-armored Rolls-Royce Cullinan. Its sheer, overwhelming presence Gleaming paint and tinted bulletproof windows made every single pedestrian on the street stop and turn their heads in absolute awe. The heavy rear door opened quietly from the inside. A stern-faced, impeccably groomed middle-aged man wearing a tailored black suit and pristine white gloves stepped out onto the concrete. "Miss Sterling," he said smoothly, approaching her and bowing deeply from the waist. "Mr. Sterling sent me to escort you and the young master home immediately." It was Mr. Graves, Harrison Sterling's fiercely loyal, utterly ruthless executive assistant and head of security for over 20 years. From behind him, two young women in crisp, high-end professional medical attire emerged from the luxurious depths of the SUV. A specialized, highly paid elite baby nurse and an expert postpartum recovery nurse. With a practiced, comforting efficiency that left absolutely no room for argument, one woman gently but incredibly securely took the sleeping Leo from Cordelia's tired arms. The other woman immediately supported Cordelia's arm with a firm, professional grip. The physical pressure was absolutely perfect, a clinical touch designed specifically to place zero strain on her recovering, wounded body. Cordelia simply nodded, letting out a long, shuddering exhale, allowing them to guide her to the cavernous rear seat of the Rolls-Royce. As she sank into the thick, heated, butter-soft leather, it felt like sitting on a warm cloud. The air inside the cabin was perfectly climate-controlled and smelled of expensive, clean leather and subtle cedar. It was an entirely different universe from the stuffy, exhaust-choked air and jarring, painful movements of the city bus. Mr. Graves closed the heavy armored door with a solid thud, shutting out the noise of Queens entirely. The massive car pulled away smoothly, utterly silently, leaving the humble, dingy apartment building, and the 2 years Cordelia had wasted there begging for love, behind like a soiled, forgotten, pathetic past. Their destination was not the cramped home she had shared with Caleb Thorne. It was the sprawling, ultra-exclusive Sterling family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, where she had been born and raised like royalty. During the long drive out of the city, Mr. Graves sat in the front passenger seat, staring straight ahead, speaking only when absolutely necessary to coordinate with the security perimeter at the estate. The two nurses attended to their duties with quiet, invisible competence. They checked Leo's vitals, offered Cordelia an electrolyte-infused water bottle, and draped a heavy, priceless cashmere blanket over her shivering lap. Everything was seamless. Everything was perfect. Cordelia leaned her head back against the plush headrest and closed her eyes. Pure, unadulterated exhaustion washed over her body like a massive tidal wave. Yet her mind was strangely, terrifyingly clear. 2 years with Caleb Thorne, believing she loved him, quietly enduring the relentless, snide insults from his mother and sister, willingly accepting a modest, restricted lifestyle to prove she wasn't a snob. It had all been a miserable, pathetic illusion created entirely by her own romantic foolishness. There had never been any real love from him. There had only been a foolish, arrogant man who grew overly confident, completely failing to realize that the grand prize he had won was the sole daughter of the Sterling dynasty. He was just a hyena flocking to a kill. Eventually, the Rolls-Royce passed through massive, imposing wrought iron security gates. It drove slowly up a winding, mile-long, tree-lined approach, and finally stopped silently before the grand main entrance of a sprawling stone mansion that looked exactly like a modern-day European castle. The heavy oak double doors were thrown open by waiting staff. Standing perfectly still at the top of the grand marble steps was her father. Harrison Sterling was dressed casually but impeccably in a navy cashmere cardigan and dark trousers. He looked as physically imposing and terrifying as ever, a man who regularly broke Fortune 500 CEOs before lunch. But as Cordelia looked closer, she could see a faint, agonizing crease of profound, paternal worry etched deeply between his brows. He looked past the butler, past the nurses, his intense gaze fixed directly on Cordelia's pale face, and then his eyes dropped to the tiny, bundled baby resting in the nurse's arms. Dad. Cordelia's voice was hoarse, cracking as she stepped out of the car. Instead of wrapping his daughter in a gentle hug, Harrison Sterling stepped forward and took her pale face firmly in both of his large, calloused hands. His grip was grounding. He stared into her eyes, silently assessing the damage done to her soul. He then turned and signaled sharply for the elite nurse to bring the baby to him. For the very first time, the billionaire patriarch held his newborn grandson. Harrison looked down at little Leo's peaceful, sleeping face. A violent, terrifying vortex of conflicting emotions swirled in his dark eyes. Profound tenderness, deep pity, and a volcanic, world-ending rage held violently in check only by his sheer force of will. "You are home." "That is all that matters," Harrison said, his voice low, gravelly, but vibrating with absolute, undeniable conviction. He turned his piercing gaze to his army of waiting staff. "Take Miss Sterling and the baby directly to her private suites and let them rest immediately. Have the chief of medicine from Mount Sinai come here. Now." Surrounded by a dedicated team of household staff, Cordelia stepped over the threshold into the grand mansion that felt both profoundly nostalgic and slightly foreign after her exile in Queens. The polished marble floors shone like dark mirrors, reflecting the light of a massive, tiered crystal chandelier that cast a soft, welcoming golden glow. The faint, expensive scent of sandalwood and fresh lilies hung perfectly in the air. This was the world Cordelia Sterling was meant to inhabit. The world of absolute, untouchable power she had willingly abandoned for a facade of love. She was led gently up the grand staircase to her old, sprawling bedroom suite. The lavish furnishings, the silk curtains, the antique vanity, they were all exactly as she had left them years ago. But in a quiet corner of the massive room, a top-of-the-line, ultra-luxury bassinet and an array of carefully selected, premium baby supplies were arranged perfectly. It was as if they had been waiting patiently for her inevitable return all along. The family doctor, rushed in by helicopter, soon arrived. He gave Cordelia and little Leo a thorough, meticulous examination, declaring them both perfectly fine, provided Cordelia received strict bed rest. A private nurse carefully redressed her burning C-section incision with high-grade, soothing ointments. A maid helped her change out of her cheap, sweat-stained clothes and into a pair of impossibly soft, pure silk pajamas. A bowl of warm, deeply nourishing bone broth was brought to her on a heavy silver tray. When she was finally settled, hydrated, and sitting alone with her father, Harrison sat down slowly in a leather armchair opposite her bed. He steepled his fingers, rested his chin on them, and watched her with dark, unreadable eyes. "Tell me," Harrison commanded softly. "Tell me every single thing that happened. Do not leave out a single word." Holding a porcelain cup of warm milk in both trembling hands, Cordelia began to speak. Starting from the morning of her hospital discharge, she told him everything. She told him about the handful of dirty cash shoved into her hands for the public bus, about Caleb and his family eagerly taking her luxury car to go to a high-end steakhouse to celebrate without her, about seeing Caleb's joyful, relaxed, smiling face through the window of the Maybach while she bled on the plastic seat of a bus. Her tone was surprisingly, terrifyingly flat. She recounted the horrific facts utterly dispassionately, as if she were reading an emotionless corporate audit report about a total stranger. Harrison's stoic expression didn't change a fraction of an inch as he listened. But Cordelia did not miss the terrifying detail that his large hands, resting firmly on his knees, were clenched so incredibly tightly that his knuckles had turned bone white. The fabric of his slacks was wrinkling under his crushing grip. When she finally finished her story, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the massive bedroom. Harrison stood up slowly. He walked over to the edge of the bed, reached out, and awkwardly but incredibly gently stroked his daughter's hair. In that instant, the towering dam of Cordelia's icy composure completely shattered. A raw, agonizing sob escaped her lips. She cried like a lost, terrified child who had finally found the absolute safety of home. Her father's large, warm hand continued to stroke her trembling head in complete, unbroken silence, absorbing her pain. "It is over now," Harrison said quietly, his voice a dark rumble. "You will not suffer anymore, Cordelia. From this exact moment forward, Sterling Holdings will be your absolute shield and the boys. I will never let anyone on this earth lay a single finger on either of you again. Do whatever you want. Even if the sky falls, your father will hold it up for you." Just then, the sharp, piercing ring of the heavy antique telephone on the bedside table shattered the tender silence. It rang once, twice, a third time, angry, insistent. A moment later, a soft, respectful knock came at the bedroom door, and Mr. Graves appeared. He bowed low to Harrison, then glanced at Cordelia with a deeply troubled, disgusted expression on his face. "Mr. Sterling," the butler said quietly, "there is an incoming call for Miss Cordelia on the main estate line. It is Mr. Thorne. He is aggressively demanding to know where his wife is, and is loudly complaining that there is no prepared food in his refrigerator. He wishes to know, in his exact words, where she has been gallivanting all afternoon." The word struck the very last, microscopic vestiges of affection in Cordelia's heart and shattered them into a million pieces of toxic dust. "No food in the refrigerator. Where have you been gallivanting?" Those were absolutely not the words of a concerned, loving husband looking for his missing wife who was 5 days postpartum. They were not the words of a frantic father looking for his newborn son. They were the cruel, entitled words of an arrogant master rebuking a disobedient, negligent housekeeper. Harrison Sterling silently watched the last drop of color drain from his daughter's beautiful face. He slowly stood up. He removed his hand from her shoulder, turned to his butler, and spoke with an eerie, lethal calm. "Graves, hang up the phone immediately. Block all calls from all numbers associated with Caleb Thorne to this entire estate. He is never, ever to be connected to my daughter again." "Very good, sir." Mr. Graves bowed deeply, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction, and quickly backed out of the room, closing the door softly. Once again, it was just father, daughter, and the quietly, peacefully breathing baby in the bassinet. Harrison walked slowly over to the massive, carved mahogany desk in the corner of the suite. He picked up the heavy receiver of the encrypted internal secure line. Cordelia watched his movements from the bed as if time were moving in slow motion. His back was as broad as a mountain, and she could physically feel the volcanic, world-ending rage simmering just millimeters beneath his tailored cardigan. "It's me," Harrison's voice rumbled into the phone. It was as calm as ever, but its low, vibrating timbre held an absolute, terrifying atmospheric pressure that could instantly freeze the blood of any CEO on Wall Street. "Pierce, apologies for calling so late," Harrison said. "It's an urgent Tier 1 matter regarding Caleb Thorne's startup, Next-Gen Innovations, the tech company you are currently heavily funding in your Series B investment round." Cordelia held her breath, clutching her silk sheets. Pierce was the head of Sterling Capital, one of the massive, central core entities of Sterling Holdings. And Next-Gen Innovations was the company Caleb Thorne valued infinitely more than his own life or his own marriage. "Yes, that's right," Harrison continued smoothly. "Do not ask me for a reason. As of this exact second, Sterling Holdings has decided to permanently and completely cut off all financial, social, and structural support for him. I want you to move your legal teams immediately to recoup your entire investment." There was a pause as the man on the other line likely asked a terrified question. "Yes, Pierce. I mean immediately," Harrison snapped. "There is a material breach of the trust and relationship clause hidden in page 40 of his contract. Use it. Yes, I am personally guaranteeing the fallout. I want you to personally inform every other major investor in his syndicate of Sterling's absolute withdrawal of confidence. I will speak to the chairman of Metro Urban Bank myself in 5 minutes. First thing tomorrow morning. His company's primary lender is going to send in an emergency team for a total, Hostile asset assessment. Harrison looked out the window into the dark night. Good. 48 hours, Pierce. Within 48 hours, I want the name Next Gen Innovations completely wiped from the venture capital map. I want it burned to the bedrock. I'm counting on you. He hung up the phone with a sharp, decisive click. It was a one-sided, unilateral notice that lasted only 2 minutes. But Cordelia understood perfectly that this brief, quiet conversation in a luxurious bedroom was nothing less than a brutal, public death sentence for a multi-million-dollar company. With a single, quiet word from her father, the magnificent castle of sand that Caleb Thorne so arrogantly believed he had built entirely on his own genius would be violently washed away into the sea. There was absolutely no need to shout, to sue, or to rage in public. Simply stating that the almighty Sterling Holdings was withdrawing its invisible support was more than enough. The funding, the partner contracts, the elite staff, and the corporate prestige would instantly vanish like a rapidly receding tide. Caleb would be financially radioactive by sunrise. This was her father's true power, the raw, terrifying, godlike power of the Sterling family. A profound, intoxicating sense of strength began to seep back into Cordelia's hollowed-out heart. She was no longer a weak, crying victim. She was no longer the pathetic, helpless woman forced onto a freezing public bus, left with nothing but cold leftovers in a dingy fridge. She quietly threw off the silk covers, rose to her feet, and walked slowly to the bassinet. She looked down at little Leo's innocent, perfect face. His tiny chest was rising and falling rhythmically, his little fingers twitching occasionally in his sleep. To protect this child's future, she thought, her eyes turning utterly cold, I can gladly become a devil. This wasn't just petty revenge for a bad marriage. This was a necessary war, a battle to absolutely obliterate a threat, to win a future where her son would be treated as the most precious, untouchable being in the world. As she thought this, the lingering, pathetic guilt that had been smoldering in her heart transformed entirely into a brilliant, purifying flame called justice. Behind her, her father was already on the phone again, rapidly dialing another private number. This time it was likely the Sterling family's lead, cutthroat legal counsel. "It's Harrison," the billionaire commanded. "Proceed immediately with drawing up divorce papers. The other party is Caleb Thorne. Yes, the reason should be blindingly obvious to you. We will, of course, legally demand sole physical and legal custody and total revocation of all his parental rights. There will be absolutely zero division of marital assets." Harrison paused, his voice dropping into a lethal growl. "I want your team to meticulously assess all tangible and intangible corporate benefits he gained by secretly exploiting his marital connection to my daughter's name over the last 2 years. And I want you to file a massive, crushing counterclaim for severe financial and emotional damages. Yes, make him pay back every last miserable cent. I don't care what his bargain bin lawyer tries to say. Tell them if they do not accept our absolute, unconditional terms, we won't hesitate to litigate him into the Stone Age." Harrison let out a dark chuckle. Not that he will have the financial resources left to fight a lawsuit by tomorrow afternoon anyway. "I'm counting on you." While Cordelia slowly returned to her enormous en-suite bathroom, stripped off her silk robe, and stepped into a luxurious, steaming warm shower, Caleb Thorne's ultimate fate had already violently rolled past the point of no return. The hot water in the luxurious marble shower soothed Cordelia's exhausted, postpartum body. As she stood under the cascading spray, washing away the smell of the hospital, the city bus, and the dingy Queen's apartment, she stared at her reflection in the fogged glass. Her face was still pale, framed by dark circles of exhaustion, but there was a new, terrifyingly cold light glinting in the depths of her eyes. "I will never cry again," she whispered to the empty room. "I will never be looked down upon by anyone ever again." When she stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a plush robe, her smartphone was vibrating madly on the vanity. The screen displayed a name she knew all too well, Caleb Thorne. For a few seconds, She just stared at the glowing screen, her face an absolute blank mask. Then, taking a deep, calming breath, she slid the button to answer. Before she could even lift the phone to her ear, Caleb's furious, aggressive shouting erupted from the speaker, mingling with the shrill, complaining voices of his mother and sister in the background. "Cordelia, where the hell are you?" Caleb roared. "Why aren't you answering the house phone? My parents are here, and the house is empty. There's absolutely no food prepared in the fridge. What kind of wife are you? Don't think you can get away with this little disappearing act just because you want to throw a tantrum." Cordelia took a quiet, measured breath. She brought the phone to her lips and spoke in a flat, utterly emotionless voice. "Mr. Thorne, Leo and I are currently at my family's home in Greenwich, Connecticut." The shouting on the other end of the line stopped abruptly. The background noise instantly quieted. He must have physically covered the receiver, or moved into another room in confusion. After a few seconds of tense silence, his voice returned. It was a mixture of profound confusion and suppressed, arrogant rage. "Cordelia, what the hell are you talking about? Your family home? What family home? Didn't you say your dad was an apple farmer in upstate New York? Don't tell me you took my son and ran off to some hick town in the middle of nowhere. Don't be ridiculous. Get on a train and get back here right now. Stop this stupid game." In his arrogant, narrow mind, she was still just a petulant, dramatic woman throwing a tantrum. The fact that he honestly imagined her family home as a dilapidated, muddy farmhouse in upstate New York was so incredibly pathetic that Cordelia no longer felt even a microscopic flicker of amusement. She felt only a bottomless, yawning pity. Continuing this conversation was a complete waste of breath. Without another word, Cordelia tapped the red end call button. Then, without a single ounce of hesitation, she held down the power button until the screen went completely black. The world went blissfully silent. In the vast, quiet bedroom suite, Cordelia just stared at the dark rectangle of glass in her hand. The story of an arrogant man's catastrophic downfall was about to begin, and the person who had quietly, deliberately pulled the trigger was, without a doubt, herself. Gazing out at the jewel-like panorama of the New York City skyline in the distance, Cordelia whispered to herself, "You still have absolutely no idea, do you? You have no idea who and what you have just made an enemy of." That night, for the very first time in months, Cordelia fell into a deep, dreamless, and profoundly peaceful sleep. But she had no way of knowing that, miles away in a glass high-rise tower in the heart of the financial district, Caleb Thorne was spending a sleepless, agonizing night in a state of absolute, unadulterated panic. His tragedy had only just begun. The next morning, inside the sleek, modern president's office of Next Gen Innovations, Caleb Thorne sat at his desk, unable to hide his mounting, frantic irritation. He still couldn't get in touch with Cordelia. As he stewed in his own self-righteous anger, his heavy office door was violently thrown open without so much as a knock. His secretary burst in, her face deathly pale, clutching a tablet. "Sir, it's terrible," she gasped. "I just got an urgent call from JS Capital. They are demanding immediate, full repayment of their entire seed investment, citing a fatal breach of contract." "What?" Caleb stood up, knocking his chair back. "Don't be ridiculous. I just spoke to Pierce yesterday." At that exact, horrifying moment, the internal line on his desk blared loudly. Caleb snatched it up. It was his chief financial officer. "Caleb, it's bad. It's really bad," the CFO stammered. "Metro Urban Bank just called. The comprehensive review for our next round of funding scheduled for next week has been indefinitely suspended. Not only that, they are sending in an emergency corporate asset seizure team first thing tomorrow morning." "What?" Caleb screamed into the phone. He couldn't process it. It had to be a mistake, a sick, elaborate corporate joke. But the nightmare was just beginning to unfold. "Sir," his secretary cried out, looking at her glowing screen. ABC Corp is on line one. They are pulling out of our ongoing waterfront redevelopment project effective immediately. They won't give a reason, just a comprehensive business decision. And, sir, a top priority emergency email just landed from our American tech partner. They are terminating the software license agreement immediately. The reason cited is significant, irreversible damage to brand image. I don't understand what's happening. Caleb roared, slamming his fists onto his mahogany desk. Screams and panic shouts began to echo through the outer office as employees watched their stock options vaporize in real time. The blood completely drained from Caleb's face. His hands and feet went freezing cold, and his heart felt as if it had been encased in a solid block of ice. What is happening? This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a market fluctuation. Someone was systematically, deliberately, and ruthlessly trying to annihilate his company from the face of the earth. Who? A rival tech firm? A disgruntled former executive? It never once occurred to his arrogant mind that the absolute source of this apocalyptic destruction was a single, 2-minute phone call made by the wife he thought he had so cleverly dismissed with a crumpled $20 bill for a bus ride. In a full-blown, hyperventilating panic, Caleb grabbed his smartphone with a violently trembling hand. He tried to call his absolute last resort, a powerful, expensive political lobbyist with deep industry connections. He could fix this. He had to fix this. But as he tapped the man's number, a merciless, automated system message filled the screen. The number you have dialed has disconnected, or the caller has blocked your number. His smartphone slipped from his limp, sweaty hand and clattered onto the desk. Caleb Thorne slowly collapsed into the luxurious president's chair he had so proudly built for himself. The gates of hell had just swung open, silently and cruelly. Several days passed after Cordelia made that fateful decision in her father's study. Her daily life at the Sterling estate was deceptively calm. Her postpartum recovery was smooth, and her private doctor gave her a clean bill of health. Above all, the presence of little Leo filled her healing heart with a warm, brilliant light. She rarely thought about her nightmarish days with the Thorne family anymore. It felt like a pathetic memory from a past life, distant and rapidly fading. One afternoon, as Cordelia was enjoying the sun on a garden bench, her butler, Mr. Graves, approached. There was a hint of rare, aristocratic consternation on his stoic face. "Miss Sterling," he bowed slightly. "A package has arrived at the main gate from Mr. Thorne. He specifically requested that you receive it personally." A package from Caleb. A faint ripple disturbed the calm surface of Cordelia's heart. Could it be a pathetic letter of apology? Leaving Leo with his nanny, Cordelia went to the grand entrance hall. Resting on the polished marble floor was a filthy, recycled cardboard box, the kind one might scavenge from the back of a supermarket. It was sealed haphazardly with cheap packing tape, and for Cordelia Sterling was scrawled aggressively across the side in a rough, angry hand. The very sight of it dashed any faint, lingering hopes she might have possessed about his humanity. "Open it, please," she commanded quietly. A young maid carefully sliced the tape with a silver letter opener. As the dirty box opened, out spilled Cordelia's cheap, discarded personal belongings from her undercover life with Caleb. A worn-out dressing gown, a set of half-empty drugstore cosmetics, parenting magazines she had read during her pregnancy. They were all jumbled together like literal garbage. And resting on top of it all, a single folded sheet of notebook paper. Cordelia picked it up. Unfolding it, she saw Caleb's furious, almost illegible handwriting. The ink was heavily smudged, a clear testament to his frantic frustration and raging impatience. "Cordelia, enough with this childish disappearing act. What the hell do you think you're doing, running off with the kid? Do you have any idea how much unnecessary trouble you've caused my mother and sister? Here are your cheap things. Take them back. The apartment was a pigsty with all your junk in it. Be back here by noon today, or else I'll get serious and take brutal legal action. Don't forget, you are my wife, And that boy is a thorn, the heir to our family. Cordelia read the delusional letter to the very end, her regal expression completely unchanging. No tears welled up. No sudden anger surged. There was only a profound, sickening sense of disgust rising from the pit of her stomach and a bottomless, terrifying contempt. He still didn't get it. He had absolutely no idea his company was currently standing on the crumbling edge of a cliff. Nor did he realize who was preparing to violently push him off. All he could think about was his own minor inconvenience. The annoyance of his property, his wife and child, not being exactly where he wanted them. This man was fundamentally beyond saving. Cordelia crumpled the letter in her fist, and as if touching something infectious, tossed it into a nearby brass wastebasket. "Mr. Graves," she said, her voice dropping to a glacial temperature. "Yes, Miss Sterling?" "Please dispose of everything in this filthy box. The clothes and books can be donated to a local charity. The cosmetics can be thrown into the incinerator. I never want to see a single trace of it again. As you wish, Miss Sterling." Seeing the absolute, lethal rejection in her icy eyes, Mr. Graves bowed deeply. The offending cardboard box was swiftly, permanently removed from her sight. That evening, the Sterling family held their monthly, lavish family dinner. Harrison's brothers, Cordelia's powerful uncles, and her elite cousins all gathered in the vast, candlelit dining room. The light clinking of baccarat crystal glasses, the rich aroma of French cuisine, the soft strains of a live string quartet. It was a world of absolute, untouchable, refined elegance. A jarring contrast to the cheap, tense dinner tables of her 2 years with the Thorns. The conversation turned casually to recent economic news. One of her uncles, who headed the ruthless financial acquisition division of Sterling Holdings, casually remarked while swirling a glass of fine vintage Bordeaux, "Speaking of sudden collapses, I heard an incredibly amusing story from the tech sector this morning. A company called Next Gen Innovations, I think. The arrogant young CEO, who came out of nowhere, is suddenly on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. Quite a spectacular, bloody roller coaster of a fall." At those words, Cordelia paused for a fraction of a second, her silver fork hovering over her porcelain plate. Another cousin chimed in with dark amusement. "Oh, I read the confidential briefings on that, too." Apparently, every single major VC firm pulled their funding out simultaneously, and even his primary lender abandoned him overnight. He must have really deeply angered someone you do not want to anger. Serves him right, I suppose. What a spectacular crash and burn. There was no pointed malice in their conversation. They were simply consuming the dramatic, desperate turmoil of the lower corporate world as a form of light dinner entertainment. The fact that a man named Caleb Thorne's entire life was being violently destroyed was just another pinch of spice to liven up their soup. Cordelia silently brought a spoonful of consommé to her lips. The perfectly clear, golden liquid tasted like absolute victory. Once, Cordelia had held a certain naive disdain for her family's coldness, their almost ruthless pragmatism, but not anymore. This overwhelming power, this logic that could appear so cruel to outsiders, was now the strongest, most impenetrable fortress protecting her and the sleeping child upstairs. "He simply needed to be taught a lesson," Harrison Sterling murmured suddenly from the head of the table, cutting a piece of steak. With that single, terrifying sentence, everyone present at the table instantly understood the entire situation. No one asked any more questions. They simply cast meaningful, deeply respectful glances at Cordelia before smoothly changing the subject. Those glances held a silent, powerful message of welcome and absolute solidarity. "Welcome back, Cordelia. You are a true Sterling after all." The first pathetic attempt at a counterattack came 2 afternoons later. Cordelia was enjoying the tranquil afternoon in the garden, pushing Leo in his stroller when the silence was broken by the hurried footsteps of Mr. Graves. His usually stoic face was marked with an undisguisable look of profound distaste. "Miss Sterling," he began, A report from the main gate security. Mr. Thorne's mother and sister have arrived. They have no appointment, but they are aggressively insisting they must see you immediately. So, they've finally come, Cordelia thought calmly. The financial fire engulfing Caleb's company must have finally reached their own designer shoes, making it impossible for them to sit and wait any longer. Are they causing a public scene at the gate? She asked. Not yet, Miss Sterling. However, their demeanor over the security intercom is highly agitated and incredibly vulgar. Cordelia stopped the stroller and turned to face her butler. Her eyes were as calm and deep as an autumn lake. Mr. Graves, please show them to the garden gazebo. Miss Sterling. Mr. Graves couldn't help but protest, his protective instincts flaring. To have you face such classless, desperate individuals alone is far too dangerous. It's all right, Cordelia interrupted him, her tone gentle but lined with steel. This is my home. I should have the grace to entertain uninvited pests. But I refuse to let the air in the main house be tainted by their presence. The gazebo will do. Just have some warm tea prepared. As you wish. Cordelia left Leo with his dedicated nanny, returned to her suite, and changed into a high-quality, impeccable Chanel tweed dress. She was not going into battle. She was simply going to calmly exterminate insects that had trespassed on her territory. For that, an impeccable outfit was required. The gazebo, an elegant structure of carved cypress wood, was situated in the middle of the garden, surrounded by a serene stream where massive koi fish swam lazily. Cordelia arrived first and sat on a stone bench, crossing her legs elegantly. Soon, two figures approached, their cheap high heels crunching loudly and inappropriately on the manicured gravel path. It was Caleb's mother and his sister, Brenda. Both were dressed to the nines in what were clearly their absolute best, albeit outdated, designer knockoff outfits. But their gaudy attire looked like cheap Halloween costumes against the refined, centuries-old elegance of the Sterling estate. Their faces were a grotesque, twitching mixture of profound awe at the overwhelming wealth surrounding them, and a desperate, greedy attempt to maintain their arrogant composure. Oh, Cordelia! Thank goodness! We're so glad you'd see us! The mother-in-law chirped in a fake, sickeningly high-pitched voice, rushing into the gazebo and trying to grab Cordelia's hands. Cordelia subtly but clearly shifted her body, avoiding the woman's touch as if recoiling from something radioactive. A flash of ugly resentment crossed the older woman's face, but she quickly masked it with a strained, trembling smile. My, what a magnificent home! We were so incredibly worried about you. You should have told us sooner that you came from such means. Brenda followed suit, forcing a sycophantic plastic smile. Her greedy eyes darted around restlessly, appraising the financial value of the statues and the landscaping. Really, Cordelia, disappearing with the baby like that? It was so thoughtless of you. Mom and I were so worried we couldn't even sleep. Cordelia said absolutely nothing. She simply picked up a porcelain cup of high-grade green tea a maid had brought and admired its delicate, hand-painted pattern as if their presence were completely invisible to her. Her heavy, judgmental silence must have deeply unnerved them, because the mother-in-law finally cracked and got straight to the point, adopting the pathetic air of a tragic heroine. Listen, Cordelia, we're family, aren't we? The mother pleaded. If there was some silly little misunderstanding, we can talk it out face to face. Caleb's company, well, it's in a bit of trouble right now. But isn't that what marriage is about? Supporting each other through the hard times? If you just hide away here at your rich family's home with the child, it only makes it harder for him to focus. Brenda leaned forward eagerly, her true arrogance bleeding through. That's right. As his sister, let me tell you, your behavior has been incredibly selfish. When a man is out there struggling in the corporate world, it's our job as women to protect the home and support him quietly. Now, come on, pack your things. Let's go home with us. Mom said she'll make your favorite pot roast for dinner. At those incredibly stupid words, Something inside Cordelia finally snapped. She slowly set down her teacup. The sharp, ceramic clink echoed loudly in the quiet gazebo. "Go home?" Cordelia asked, finally looking them directly, lethally in the face. Her voice was quiet, but it had the exact temperature of liquid nitrogen. "To which home? The one where you told me, 5 days after giving birth, to take a public bus? Or the one where there wasn't a single warm meal prepared, only cold leftovers waiting for me in the fridge while you all ate expensive steak on my dime?" The mother-in-law's face changed color violently. She waved her hands frantically, sweating. "Oh dear, Cordelia, that was a huge misunderstanding. Caleb was wrong that day. I told him so myself. He was just so preoccupied with work. He wasn't thinking straight." "Not thinking straight?" Cordelia cut her off, her voice slicing like a scalpel. "He had the presence of mind to drive my $500,000 luxury car with all of you inside it to a high-end steakhouse. But he wasn't thinking straight when he handed his bleeding wife $20 to take a bus with his newborn baby." At this, Brenda finally lost her temper, revealing her true, ugly nature. Her shrill voice pierced the tranquility of the garden. "Are you still going on about that?" Brenda shrieked. "What's the big deal about one little bus ride? You are so unbelievably petty. Right now, Caleb's company is about to go entirely under, and you, his wife, instead of bailing him out, you're just digging up the past. How selfish can you be?" "Selfish." Cordelia looked at Brenda and let out a small, incredibly cold laugh. It was a laugh of pure, distilled contempt. "Brenda, when you gave birth to your child, how were you treated by your family? Weren't you served nutritious meals every single day and told not to lift a finger for a month? But when it's my turn, it's suddenly perfectly natural for me to ride a filthy bus and eat cold leftovers. Is there some kind of sick caste system for the women who marry into your pathetic family?" Brenda, struck exactly where it hurt, turned beet red and was utterly speechless. Seeing the tide turn catastrophically, the mother-in-law switched back to fake, weeping tears. "Cordelia, please. We were wrong about the past. I was wrong. I apologize. I'll apologize 1,000 times. But for little Leo's sake, you can't just stand by and watch Caleb go bankrupt. He's so little. How will he live without a father?" Father. That word touched Cordelia's absolute last nerve. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress, and looked down at the two flustered, desperate women as an absolute monarch might look down upon groveling, treasonous subjects. "Father? What exactly is that man to Leo?" Cordelia's voice was now a deadly monotone, devoid of all human emotion. "Are you suggesting that my son should rely on a man who would have him live a life of public buses? Or a man who will soon be utterly unable to even afford baby formula?" Cordelia walked to the edge of the gazebo, turning her back to them entirely in a show of absolute dismissal. "Don't you worry about my son. My son will have the most powerful, untouchable financial and social support in the world from now on. Whether Caleb Thorne goes bankrupt, goes to prison, or ends up begging on the streets is of absolutely no concern to me or my child." She turned back slowly to face the two women, whose faces had now gone deathly, sickeningly pale. "This is my home. You are not welcome here. Do not ever show your faces here again." Cordelia declared it with regal, chilling finality. "Mr. Graves," she called out. Mr. Graves, who had been waiting discreetly in the shadows under a nearby covered walkway, immediately stepped forward. He stood before the mother and sister like a towering gray stone statue, and with a polite but incredibly firm gesture, pointed toward the exit. Brenda tried to scream something vile, but she swallowed her pathetic words when she saw two massive, heavily armed security guards materialize from the hedges on either side of Mr. Graves. She shot Cordelia a look filled with impotent hatred and hissed through clenched teeth, "You'll regret this, you bitch!" Cordelia watched with dead, cold eyes as they were physically escorted away like common, trespassing criminals. She felt no satisfaction. Only an icy calm spread through her veins. "Oh, I'm sure I will," she murmured to the empty gazebo. "I will be waiting right here to see what foolish, desperate move you make next." The final execution, the climax of the tragedy, arrived a week later. Caleb Thorne, completely destitute, locked out of his own corporate buildings and abandoning all pride, showed up at the sprawling gates of the Sterling estate. He looked like a feral, starving animal. Cordelia did not let him inside the main house. She had Mr. Graves escort him to the sterile, concrete security guardhouse at the edge of the property. When Cordelia walked into the interrogation-style room wearing a breathtaking silk dress and flawless makeup, Caleb completely broke down. He fell to his knees on the concrete floor, sobbing, begging for her to ask her wealthy family to invest in him, to save him. Cordelia looked down at him with a smile of pure, demonic amusement. "You want to know who my father is?" she whispered, leaning down. "My father is the man whose face has graced the cover of the business journals you read every morning with such bitter envy. My father is Harrison Sterling." Caleb's eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing horror. The founder of Sterling Holdings, the emperor of the economy. He had married the daughter of a god, and he had treated her like trash. "And the reason your company went bankrupt." Cordelia whispered into his ear, her voice dripping with lethal poison. "The reason the bank turned on you, the reason your partners scattered like cockroaches, is because I made one single phone call to my dad, and I did it all in exchange for a $20 bus fare." An inhuman, agonizing scream tore from Caleb's throat. He clutched his head and collapsed onto the concrete floor, writhing and sobbing like a madman as the overwhelming truth mercilessly consumed his mind. Cordelia turned her back on him and walked out. A month later, the divorce was finalized in a luxury hotel suite. Caleb, reduced to a hollow shell, signed away all his parental rights and accepted a $5 million damage penalty that would keep him in crushing debt for the rest of his natural life. With the stroke of a Cartier pen, Cordelia legally restored her maiden name. She donated the black Maybach to a domestic violence charity, watching it get towed away with a serene smile. She was finally free. A year later, Cordelia launched Stella Maris, a massive, internationally recognized charitable foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable mothers and children. She ran it with the ruthless efficiency of a CEO and the deep, profound empathy of a survivor. She also found a true equal, Julian Vance, a brilliant, grounded investment founder who admired her strength and respected her mind. They walked through Central Park on weekends, watching little Leo take his first steps, building a quiet, deeply powerful life together. Cordelia Sterling had burned her old life to the ground, and from the ashes, she had built an absolute empire.